So this video is going to take 5 steps to tell you what is needed to start a midterm rental business. Before we get going, let's talk about money, because that will help dictate whether or not this even makes sense for you. And just quickly, my name is Erin Spradlin. I am a midterm rental consultant. I have had my own midterm rentals since 2017, which is when Denver passed regulation that really limited doing short-term rentals on anything but your primary residence. Well, we already had short-term rentals. We had to come up with a plan, so we jumped into midterm rentals at that time. I have written 3 books available on Amazon about midterm rentals. I'll link to that in the description. I will also link to the consulting services that I offer for midterm rentals, all of which you'll be able to find in the description. So let's talk money first. These numbers come from 5 different states, 5 different midterm rentals, and these were pulled in Q2 of 2024. So the states I pulled from were Colorado, Texas, Missouri, Georgia, and DC, Washington, DC. The average that hosts made for their first rental for the first month was $4,300, and that is what the tenant paid to them. If we annualize that, it comes out to $51,000, but that assumes that you'll stay rented the whole time, which you might not. You probably won't. So I always tell investors, as a rule of thumb, take it down to 80%, and if we take it down to 80%, what you can expect to get is closer to $40,000 annually. This also assumes that you're renting out an entire property and that you're not doing a rent by the room or just renting out a room in your house. So to be clear, as a point of definition, midterm rentals are often called the traveling nurse model, the corporate rental model, MTRs, or midterm rentals. You also might be familiar with Furnish. That is also a company in the midterm rental space. And because midterm rentals have all those different names, I just like to be clear definition-wise on what they are. A midterm rental is an entire property rental. So you're renting on the front door, not on all of the bedroom doors. You're not doing a rent by the room. You're renting for 30 days or more, because that helps protect you with most regulation in most cities. And finally, you are renting furnished. So that is what a midterm rental is. 30 days furnished, 1 rental, not renting to multiple parties throughout the house. So some other things to consider when you're looking at the money is how much is your mortgage and is this worth it to you? The other thing to consider is, do you have an idea of who would rent your place clearly? I don't even know if I like this question, because you're not an expert in this. You're not thinking about it all the time. You're probably new to midterm rentals, so you may have no idea, and that's okay. But what we want to avoid is like a 6-bedroom house in the middle of the woods. That's not a great setup for a midterm rental, because there's not a lot of people working around in that area that would need that type of property. And then finally, the other thing that you want to ask yourself when you're considering a midterm rental is, am I good at communication? Am I going to be on top of the communication? Because that's really important with rentals, regardless of whether or not it's a long-term, a midterm, or a short-term. If you're going to self-manage, you need to be on top of the communication so that you can get them in when they're interested, and that means being fairly fast on your communication. Before we get into step number 1, which will cover LLCs, please like this video if you feel like you have learned something. And again, if you are interested in consulting, I offer it at the 1-hour, 2-hour, and the Hold My Hand package, and I will drop a link to that in the description, as well as links for all 3 of the books on Amazon. So the first thing we're going to talk about is an LLC, which is a type of business structure that your rental can reside under. There are other types of business structures that your rental can reside under, but a lot of investors put them in an LLC. So just a caveat before I go into that, I am not a lawyer. I am not an accountant. You have a responsibility to reach out to an accountant or a lawyer if you want to know more information about this and what type of business structure makes the most sense for you. I think a lot of people do an LLC because it's quick and easy, it's cheap, and there's not a lot to it. And the benefit to the LLC, or one of the benefits to the LLC, is that it isolates and protects the assets for that property into one silo. So if you have multiple properties, or you have this rental property, but then you have a personal property, or you have a savings, if your property, the property that you're going to do the midterm rental on, is under that LLC, then if there's any issue with that property, if someone hurt themselves in it or they wanted to sue you, they can only go after the assets that are related to that LLC. But the second step of that is that you have to have a bank account and everything has to flow in and out of that bank account to also keep that protection. So we'll talk about that in step 2. And if you stay until the end, I will talk to you about a best practice as far as a naming convention around LLCs and the way a lot of investors do it. But the rules for setting up an LLC or the requirements are different state to state. In Colorado, it will take you about 10 minutes and cost you $50. It's super easy to do. That might be different in your state. So the best way to figure out how to do it in your state is to do a Google search around what are the rules around setting up an LLC for my state, and then Googling Secretary of State and then your state's name, because that's where the documents live and that's where you will start the business setup, is on the Secretary of State for your particular state. At least in Colorado, that's how we do it. And I assume that carries over into most other states. If you know differently on that, please document it in the comments because your peers could benefit from that information. All right, now let's talk about bank accounts. So you're going to want to set up a bank account for your rental property, pretty much for the same reason that you're going to want an LLC, which is that you want to protect those assets so that if anything happens, they can only go after the money that is flowed in and out of that bank account, and that bank account is tethered to the LLC. So you won't be able to set up that bank account until the LLC is in place, and then you'll go in and say, hey, I want to set up a bank account for my rental property. They'll say, great, do you have an LLC for that bank account? And you will say yes, and you will probably tether the name of your bank account to the LLC. I think most banks will probably require that. So then they will set up the bank account. I recommend having a checking and a savings on the bank account, and the checking is where your operating costs are going to go, and your operating costs are going to be like your mortgage, the cost to furnish it, the rent as it comes in and out. All of that is going to come under the checking. So your operating costs are tied to the checking in and out through there. And then the savings often is used for the deposit. A note about the deposit. In some states, it is required that the landlords hold the deposit in an interest-bearing account. So you need to Google my state interest-bearing account for the deposit and see what comes up. Other states don't. And in other states, they allow you to commingle operating budget and operating costs with the deposit. I think regardless of where you're at, it's a best practice to have the deposit in a totally different account, whether that be a savings or an interest-bearing account somewhere else. And the reason for that is because most of the time when landlords get in trouble or there's an issue, it has to do with that deposit. And what the state doesn't want you to be doing is borrowing against that deposit while your tenant is in place, with the assumption that you will just borrow the money now, but you'll have it later. And when it's time to pay them back their deposit, you'll have the money. And then all of a sudden you don't have the money and you don't have an explanation for where the money is. So if you just isolate the deposit, keep it separate and don't touch it, then that's a good way to protect yourself and also protect the tenant's money. Okay, step number 3, we're going to talk about furnishing the property. Before I get into that, again, I will drop into the description the Wi-Fi smart lock that I use, as well as the mattresses that I like and the blackout blinds that I have in a lot of my different properties. The benefit of blackout blinds, not just being that it allows people to sleep, but also that it regulates noise and temperature in a property. So blackout blinds are like my perfect favorite product across the board. But for this video, let's talk about what it will cost you to furnish your rental. I'm going to refer to my own book for this. This book was written in 2023, so the information is not that old, and it's on page 14 if you buy this book that you'll be able to find this table. So a one bedroom is going to cost you roughly $5,000. A 2-bedroom is going to cost you $6,500 to $9,000. A 3-bedroom is going to cost you $9,000 to $11,500, and a 4-bedroom is going to cost you $11,500 to $15,000. Obviously, this depends on how nice you do your furnishing, but I really like using Amazon for this, and I am an Amazon influencer. But if you look back in this book, before I was an Amazon influencer, and in videos that I made before I became an Amazon influencer, I'm saying use Amazon. And the reason why I'm saying use Amazon, if you're comfortable using Amazon, and I understand that there are very good arguments for not using Amazon, but if you are, The reason why I like them is because you have different price points. You have a range of reviews, so you get a really clear picture of how people respond to the product that you have, and then finally it gets shipped straight to you. So I feel like you save money and save costs, and you can make informed decisions because there's all those reviews there. As a side note, if you are looking for a room by room checklist and a room by room guide, if you go to my midterm rental shop, which I will link in the description, I have it all laid out for you, the products that I use and that I like. I also have a note to say whether or not I've bought this product or if I'm just picking this product based off of its reviews and price point. Okay, so it's going to depend on how nice you do your property. If your property is in West Elm, Crate and Barrel, etc., which is appropriate for a little bit more upscale unit, then it's not going to cost you those numbers. If it's more of a mid-level property or lower, then it'll be closer to that. What about the lock that I'm going to link to? Airbnb has specific locks that will work directly with Airbnb, and you will find that on the Midterm Rental Shop, but it's actually not the lock that I use. I use a smart lock that is Wi-Fi enabled, but because we're in the midterm space, I don't feel the need to pay the extra for the Airbnb enabling because I'm probably only going to be switching it out 3 or 4 times a year. Also, I like this particular brand of lock. I just find it easy to use. Okay, let's get to step 4, photos. Okay, so let's talk about photos. I've paid anywhere between $400 to $800 for professional photos. It depends on the size of the property and the location and the market you're in. If you don't know how to find someone that can photograph your property correctly, then I recommend reaching out to the realtor and asking them who they used as a real estate photographer, because that same person will shoot your rental photos. And there is a difference. The professionals know how to do it versus people that are just hobbyists. And here's 2 quick tips for your photographs. Make sure all the blinds are up and that all the curtains are open. Natural light is really going to help you out here. And I have seen it with a lot of photos where they photograph it and the curtains are pulled or the blinds are down, and that's a problem. You don't want to do that. And second, if you are a property that has multiple bedrooms, let's say 3 or 4 bedrooms, it is a good practice to use the same comforter on all of the beds and make it a solid, neutral, kind of earthy color. What we don't want is any kind of distraction or turn off based off of the comforter. So earth tones, neutral, solid colors won't do that. But you also want to distinguish that it's a different room so that it's easy for you to organize if you do the setup of the listing, but also so that your tenants can easily recognize that it's a different bedroom. So have maybe a throw blanket on the end, also a solid color, but make sure that the throw blanket for each room is a different color so that it's easy for them to understand that you're moving from room to room to room and that it's not all the same room. Okay, step number 5, our final step before I get to that LLC tip, and that is listing your rental on the major platforms. There are 3 of which that service midterm rentals, and those 3 in my mind are Airbnb, Zillow, and Furnish Finder. Zillow and Furnish Finder, you're going to have less traffic, so you may deal with more vacancy there. Also, there's more lowballing specifically on Furnish Finder. But the benefit to those 2 platforms is that you can put them on a lease, you can take a deposit, you can control the transaction a lot more, and you're also probably going to make more money because they're not going to take as high of a cut. In fact, Zillow is totally free to the landlord. Furnish Finder has a very nominal price to be a landlord on Furnish Finder, whereas Airbnb is going to take 3% of your sales, but they're going to take 15% from the tenant, which means you're only going to have so high of a threshold. However, Airbnb is the most sophisticated platform. It has the most protection for you. You have the most volume there. So there's pros and cons for being on each platform. But you have your professional photos, you have your LLC, your bank account. It's time to set up on one of those platforms and go live. I know this can be the scariest. Let's talk about that LLC recommendation that I have, the best practice. So when you are doing an LLC and you're getting it set up, a lot of investors do it where they name their LLC whatever the address is of the property. And the reason for this is you acquire more properties. Now it's going to become an issue if you have like 20 properties. You're probably not going to have 20 LLCs on them. You might, but then you're paying for lawyer costs and that's a whole different thing. But let's say you acquire 3 or 4 properties in the next 4 or 5 years, then the benefit of the LLC and naming the LLC after the property address is that you very easily know what ties to what. Same thing with the bank account, because the bank account is most likely going to have the same name as the LLC. Finally, if you want to know more about the experience that that the 5 midterm rentals in the 5 different states had, I recommend checking out this playlist because it is a playlist dedicated to those 5 different midterm rentals. And again, that's Q2 2024, so fairly recent numbers. Thanks.